she wasn't supposed to survive. When the sun rose that morning on the dusty road just outside of Hollow Creek, no one expected to find anything more than wind-blown tumbleweeds and maybe the occasional desert fox. But there she was, crumpled beside a rusted mile marker, her body bruised, her clothes torn, and a cardboard sign hanging from her neck that read, in jagged black marker, "Useless mouth." And yet, she breathed. No one knows who left her there. No cameras. No witnesses. Just a dry wind and the heavy silence of cruelty. She couldn't speak. Whether from trauma or a lifetime of being silenced, no one could tell. All she did was blink slowly, her eyes glazed with pain, but behind that pain, a small flicker of something else. Something that refused to go out. It was fate, or maybe something stronger, that brought Eli Foster down that road that morning. Eli wasn't a man of many words. In fact, in all of Hollow Creek, he was known as the Silent Rancher. Not mute. Just quiet. After losing his wife to cancer 7 years ago, and then his only son to a drunk driver 3 years later, Eli had shut the world out. He worked his land, fed his animals, paid his bills, and kept to himself. He'd stopped going into town. Stopped talking to neighbors. Just him, his horses, and the wind. Until her. He almost didn't see her at first. Just a shape on the edge of the road. He pulled over, thinking maybe it was a dog, injured and abandoned like so many others. But when he walked closer, his boots crunching slowly over gravel, he froze. It was a girl. A woman, barely more than skin and bone. Maybe 19, maybe 25, he couldn't tell. She had dried blood on her temple and a gash above her eyebrow. Her lips were cracked, parched. But it was the sign that made him clench his jaw. Useless mouth. She flinched when he knelt beside her. Instinct. She'd known pain, that much was obvious. Eli didn't ask questions. He lifted her gently, carried her to his old pickup truck, and drove the 20 miles back to his ranch. No one saw them go. And in that silence, a new story began. She didn't speak for weeks. Not a single word. But she watched. Eli gave her space. He set up the old guest room in his ranch house with fresh sheets, clean towels, and a cup of warm tea that she never touched. He cooked simple meals: eggs, beans, soup. Most of the time, she picked at them, barely eating. But she watched him, always. He noticed her flinch whenever he came too close. So he kept his distance. But every day, he showed up. Brought food. Left the porch light on. Sat quietly on the porch swing and watched the stars, letting her know she wasn't alone. It wasn't kindness for the sake of reward. It wasn't pity. It was just something human. And slowly, she began to heal. Her name was June. That's all she wrote when he finally gave her a small notebook and pen. Just 4 letters, June. She still wouldn't speak. Not yet. But now she was eating. Drinking water. Showering on her own. She'd sit out on the porch sometimes, watching Eli tend to the horses. Watching the sun fall over the hills in streaks of fire and gold. The first time she helped him was when one of the foals fell sick. Eli was in the barn late, trying to feed the baby horse with trembling hands. Something was wrong, and he couldn't do it alone. Then, without a word, June walked in, rolled up her sleeves, and held the foal's tiny head steady while he got the medicine down its throat. They didn't speak. But in that moment, something passed between them. A thread, small and invisible, but real. There were bad nights. Sometimes she woke up screaming, sweat-soaked and clawing at the sheets. Eli never burst into the room. He just knocked, once. Waited. Some nights she'd open the door and just sit on the floor, crying silently while he sat across the hall, saying nothing. One night, she placed the notebook outside his door. On the page, she'd written. He said I talked too much. Then he said I talked too little. Then he said nothing I said mattered. So I stopped. Eli stared at the words a long time. Then he wrote beneath it. You don't owe anyone your silence anymore. Spring came slowly to Hollow Creek. The frost lifted. Wildflowers bloomed across the dry fields. June started walking again, farther each day. She started brushing the horses, feeding the chickens. She even smiled once, watching a calf take its first wobbly steps. The townspeople began to notice. Eli was coming into town again for supplies, feed, new boots. And there was a woman sometimes sitting in the truck. Fragile looking, quiet, but no longer hollow. Then one day at the farmer's co-op, June got out of the truck. People stared. Whispers floated. Was she the girl who'd been found half dead last year? Who was she? What happened? June ignored them. She walked into the store, picked up a bag of apples, and placed them on the counter. The old cashier, a kind widow named Marnie, smiled warmly. Good to see you, Hon. And June, she nodded. Not much. Just a tiny movement. But it was enough to crack the silence that had once felt like a cage. Months passed. June began to speak again. Not much, just simple things. Thank you. Good morning. He's a good horse. Eli never pushed. Never asked her to tell him everything. But over time, she did. Bit by bit, she shared her story. Her real name was June Adler. She'd grown up in a household where anger walked in boots and slammed doors. At 17, she'd run away with a man who promised her the moon and gave her bruises instead. He kept her hidden. Hurt her. Told her she was nothing. That her words were poison. That her mouth was useless. The day she tried to leave, he beat her and drove her out to the middle of nowhere. Left her with that sign around her neck. He thought she would die. But she didn't. She survived. One summer afternoon, Eli found June in the barn, crying softly beside the same foal they'd once saved together. The foal, now grown and strong, nuzzled her shoulder. Eli sat beside her and finally asked, "Why now?" She looked at him, her eyes full of tears. Because I never believed anyone could see me and not expect anything back. Not try to control me. Not ask me to be anyone but this. She paused. Then added, "But you did. And now I can see myself again." By the second year, June had opened a small business in town, a horse grooming and care center. She spoke at the local shelter about domestic abuse. Quietly. Strongly. She never told the full story. Just enough to let others know they weren't alone. She and Eli never called it love. Not out loud. But every morning, they drank coffee together on the porch, watching the sky shift from pink to blue. And every evening, she walked beside him through the pastures, hand brushing against his. No words needed. She was once a girl left to die on the side of the road, labeled useless. Now, she was something else entirely. A survivor. A voice reborn. A heart mended not by noise, but by the quiet strength of someone who simply chose to stay. And if you ever find yourself driving down that same dusty road outside of Hollow Creek, you might see them, an old man in a cowboy hat and a young woman with wild hair, standing together in the field. Silent. But never empty.